Step 9. Making amends. Long before we ever sit across from someone to make an amend, the past has already found its way into the present. It doesn't arrive as a clear memory we can analyze or explain away. It shows up quietly, in ways that are harder to name. Certain names still land heavier than others. Certain situations still make us hesitate before we respond. Certain relationships still carry a weight we can't quite explain, even after time has passed and behavior has changed. That weight isn't always tied to guilt in a way that we usually think of it. Sometimes it feels more like tension, a subtle pressure that follows us into conversations, decisions, and moments of reflection. We may not replay specific events, but our bodies remember, our instincts remember, our pauses remember. Recovery brings enough clarity for us to notice those signals instead of outrunning them. Staying clean gives us space. It gives us room to slow down and notice what we once avoided. It allows us to sit with discomfort instead of immediately trying to fix, justify, or escape it. But stopping the behavior doesn't automatically repair the impact of what that behavior caused. Growth doesn't always reach backward on its own, and unresolved harm doesn't disappear just because we've learned better language to describe it. The 9th step enters recovery right at that edge, not to shame us for who we were and not to reopen wounds for punishment, but to ask something far more challenging. Are we willing to let our recovery become visible where it matters most? This step isn't about comfort. It's about integrity. It's about living in alignment with the change we claim to have made, even when that alignment asks us to face fear we once avoided at all costs. The 9th step doesn't accuse us of being unchanged. It asks whether we're willing to let change have consequences. I'm a recovering addict named Steve, and this is On Life's Terms. This channel exists because recovery didn't arrive in my life as a single breakthrough or a clean turning point. It unfolded gradually, often uncomfortably, and usually in ways I didn't expect. I didn't suddenly understand everything or feel ready for the work ahead. More often, recovery showed up after I had exhausted every other option. It met me in uncertainty, not clarity. Recovery asked me to stay present in places I once escaped. It asked me to take responsibility in places I once avoided. It didn't remove fear from my life. It taught me how to move through it without disappearing. On Life's Terms, we talk honestly about recovery as it actually unfolds. We explore the 12 steps, spiritual principles, character defects, and the lived experience of learning how to live differently than we did before. Not as theory and not as performance, but as something practiced daily, imperfectly, and in real time. The 9th step sits near the center of that practice because it's where internal change begins to reshape the world around us. It's where recovery stops being something we feel privately and starts becoming something that affects the people we live alongside. When awareness is no longer enough. By the time we reach the 9th step, a great deal of internal work has already been done. We've taken an honest look at ourselves. We've named patterns we once defended. We've admitted harm instead of minimizing. We've begun to understand how our actions affected other people, not just how they affected us. That kind of awareness matters. Without it, the 9th step would be reckless, but awareness has limits. Knowing what we did doesn't automatically restore trust. Insight doesn't repair relationships. Understanding the past doesn't erase its impact. At this stage in recovery, many of us feel suspended between who we used to be and who we're trying to become. We know we're changing, but the world around us hasn't always felt that change yet. That gap can feel uncomfortable. We may feel misunderstood or unseen in our growth. We may quietly hope that time will do the work for us, but time alone doesn't rebuild what was broken. This is where the 9th step begins its work. It asks us to translate internal growth into external responsibility. It asks us to move from insight into action, not for approval, but for alignment. Recovery stops being something we only feel inside and starts becoming something others can experience. That shift removes the safety of abstraction. We could no longer rely on good intentions or future promises. The 9th step asks us to stand in the present and take responsibility for the past without defensiveness or escape. It asks us to let growth show up where it costs. Fear without the old exits. Few steps bring fear to the surface as clearly as the 9th. Not the fear of consequences we once lived with, but a deeper fear that sits closer to vulnerability. Fear of being seen without explanation. Fear of anger we can't manage. Fear of silence where reassurance doesn't arrive. Addiction taught many of us how to survive by staying in motion. We learned to leave before accountability showed up. We learned to manage narratives, soften truths, or disappear entirely when things became uncomfortable. Those strategies once protected us. They helped us endure unstable environments and unpredictable reactions, but they also kept us isolated. The 9th step removes those exits. It asks us to stay where we once ran, to listen where we once defended, to speak plainly where we once explained ourselves into safety. And that request can feel overwhelming, especially when we confuse amends with punishments or humiliation. But fear doesn't mean we're doing something wrong. It means we're doing something different. It means we're stepping outside the familiar survival patterns and into responsibility we once avoided. Fear in this step becomes information rather than a warning sign. What amends actually ask of us? One of the most important shifts in this step comes from understanding what amends are and what they are not. Amends are not apologies designed to ease guilt. They are not explanations meant to soften impact. They are not requests for forgiveness or reconciliation. Amends are acts of responsibility. They acknowledge the harm without conditions and commit to change behavior regardless of outcome. This distinction matters because the 9th step is not about how we feel after the conversation. It's about how we live afterward. As we prepare for amends, people surface in our awareness in different ways. Some relationships are obvious, harm done loudly, trust broken openly. Others emerge more slowly, emotional absence, inconsistency, fear we normalized for others because we didn't know how to be present. We begin to understand that harm isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's cumulative. Sometimes it's what someone learned to tolerate because we weren't able to show up differently at the time. That realization can be painful, especially when we recognize harm that wasn't intentional, but was still real. Holding that awareness without collapsing into shame is part of the work. Responsibility does not require self-hatred. Accountability does not demand punishment. The 9th step asks for honesty, not self-destruction. The internal shift before the external one. Before a single amend is spoken out loud, something begins to change internally. We stop negotiating with memory. We stop rehearsing defenses that no longer serve us. We stop carrying the past as a secret that follows us into every interaction. There is relief in naming harm clearly, not because consequences disappear, but because denial no longer needs maintenance. We no longer brace for confrontation that never comes because we've already faced ourselves. When amends are made, the outcome is not ours to control. Some people receive them openly. Some need time. Some aren't ready. Some may never be. Recovery does not promise resolution. It promises integrity. We learn that doing the right thing doesn't depend on being met halfway. Our responsibility ends with honesty, accountability, and continued changed behavior. For many of us, this is the first time we've ever taken responsibility without conditions, without bargaining for relief or reassurance. Living amends and rebuilding trust. Some of the most meaningful amends are never spoken directly. They are lived. They show up in consistency, in reliability, in respecting boundaries, in telling the truth when it would be easier to avoid it. In addiction, our words lost meaning. Recovery gives us the opportunity to make our actions trustworthy again. Living amends unfold slowly. They don't provide instant relief, but they do provide stability. Over time, they repair more than any single conversation could. They allow trust to rebuild at a pace that honors reality instead of forcing outcomes. This is where the ninth step becomes part of daily life. Not something we complete, but something we practice. The past no longer dictates our behavior, but it continues to inform our responsibility. We live differently because we know better, and because we're willing to act on that knowledge. Freedom without erasing the past. The ninth step doesn't erase what happened. It changes our relationship to it. We stop carrying unspoken guilt into new relationships. We stop flinching when old names surface. We stop living in quiet defense. There is a freedom that comes from knowing we've done what we could, honestly and responsibly. Accountability no longer feels like humiliation. It feels like dignity. Repair no longer feels like punishment. It feels like alignment. Living in truth becomes lighter than living in fear. Recovery doesn't ask us to undo the past. It asks us to stop running from it. What the ninth step makes possible. The ninth step marks a turning point because it brings recovery out of theory and into lived reality. It teaches us that growth has weight, that integrity has substance, and that change becomes real when it shows up in our relationships. We don't make amends to control outcomes. We make them to live honestly, and in doing so, free ourselves from the quiet tension that follows avoidance. This step doesn't make life perfect. It makes life whole. If this conversation resonates with you, if recovery, growth, and learning how to live differently are part of the work you're doing, staying connected matters. On Life's Terms exists to keep these discussions honest, grounded, and real. Not polished, not performance, just lived experience shared openly. By subscribing, sharing, and staying engaged, you can help make room for more voices, more experience, and more reminders that none of us has to figure this out alone. New long-form reflections and short-form messages are added regularly, all centered on the 12 steps, spiritual principles, and the real work of recovery as it unfolds one day at a time. If you're looking for a place that speaks honestly about this path, without shortcuts, without pretending, and without trying to outrun the past, this channel stays here because you choose to support it. And that choice, like every amend we make, is how freedom is built.